Instead, we were confronted by a man with a gun. We cooperated. I opened the safe. I gave him what was there. I gave him my wallet. Shar gave him her purse. And then he told us to go out there, and he gestured out to the showroom area where the cash registers were. Of course, I knew there wasn't money in the registers, but he had the gun. As we started out of the office, Shar was beside me. He was a little bit behind. We were all moving. And as we approached the door, I reached to push it open and turned to look to see which way he wanted us to go. And Shar stumbled. And the first shot was fired. And again, and again, and again, and again, and again. My next conscious thought, I was lying on the floor and I hurt. It was quiet. He was gone. I'd been shot 3 times. Left arm, right leg, and here in the abdomen. And then I saw Shar lying face down in a pool of blood. A large pool of blood. I got to my feet. I got the phone. I called for help. And then she coughed, and I went to her. And there was a Coke machine there. There was some plastic up on it. I grabbed onto that plastic, and I got on the floor beside her, and I lifted her head. And then I saw her face. To this instant, I retreat from that next image that is forevermore burned into my memory. It was for me the absolute confirmation that life is sometimes devoid of all reason, and there are things beyond my capacity to endure. I don't know if my scream was out loud or not. And I cursed my God. And I can't remember if I said goodbye. Shar died in my arms. Obviously, I lived. But for Tom and Christy, our son and daughter, and I, that was just the beginning of the nightmare. 16 months later, I was indicted, arrested, and charged with the capital murder of my wife. I couldn't believe it. 14 months later, we went to trial. I was still clinging to what I'd been brought up to believe, that once we got to trial, the truth would out, and justice, whatever that is, would prevail. I knew it couldn't be made right, but I thought it would be brought back into some kind of balance. And I was wrong. Following a 2-week trial, during which the state of Alabama asked a jury to condemn me to death, it was a death penalty trial, I was convicted. I couldn't believe it. However, folks, I was lucky. I didn't receive a sentence of death. I received a life sentence, which in my estimation was another way of dying day by day. But that's another story. I spent the next 2 years, 103 days in an Alabama prison. And by the way, folks, it was not a country club. I know I'd had a membership in one of those. And then once again, I was lucky. On the first appeal, a unanimous decision by the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals, my conviction was overturned. Now, please understand, at that point in time, it had nothing to do with the fact of my innocence. It was because I'd received an unfair trial. Well, by God, I knew that. The first issue it was overturned on was, quote, abrogation of judicial responsibility by the trial judge. Quoting from that appellate decision. An appellate court can only marvel that a jury would convict upon such weak, minimal, and circumstantial evidence. had it not been for the actions of the trial judge, etc., etc. The trial, quote, was a mockery and a sham, a circus, end quote. Yeah, it was every bit of that. The final line in that decision says, remanded for further proceedings. Well, I was returned to Enterprise, Alabama. Now the label reverted back to accused murderer now. Paul, my lawyer, my counselor, my friend. He and I thought, okay, now we'll get a fair trial. Now we know what the lies are. Now maybe we got a chance. But you know, once again, we were wrong. Over the next more than 3 years, there were 16 sessions of criminal court there in Coffee County, Alabama. And at each of those sessions, we would appear at what they refer to as the call of the docket. And when they would call out the state of Alabama versus George William White, and by the way, that's a whole lot of folks lined up against you, we would stand and announce present, ready to proceed. The state would say nothing. The trial court would order it continued beyond that term of court over our protest. That happened 16 consecutive times. Finally, it took us going all the way back to the Alabama Supreme Court on what they call a writ of mandamus, another 75-cent legal word. You ask a higher court to order the lower court to do what they're supposed to do under the law. We went up on speedy trial. On March 31st, 1992, more than 7 years from the night Shar and I were shot, the Alabama Supreme Court said, you denied this man a speedy trial. The remedy is take him to trial within the next 30 days. Well, that don't make much good sense, but that's what we were after. Trial was scheduled for the end of April, but it didn't happen. You see, especially the preceding 6 weeks prior to that, after more than 7 years, after more than 3 years from when I was released from prison, it was as if the house of cards had started to come tumbling down, and evidence started coming to us. Some through a telephone call from a uniformed police officer at some risk to his career, who pointed us in a direction. We obtained more than 102 separate items of evidence in that next 6 weeks, every one of which had been kept hidden from us in state files for more than 7 years. Affidavits, tape recordings, scientific and ballistics reports. Paul and I made a strategic decision at that point. And on April 9th, 1992, Paul and I and 4 men carrying boxes walked into the district attorney's office, the prosecuting attorney's office, a man by the name of Joel Falmer. You will note I name names. And we confronted him and laid items in front of him. We walked out. The next day, there was a hastily called hearing. At 5 minutes after 9, Paul got a call at his office. We were told to get to the courthouse. We went in. District attorney was there. Judge came out. District attorney presented a motion to dismiss. The trial court accepted the motion and ordered the charge against me forevermore dismissed with prejudice against the state of Alabama. Now, from a layman's standpoint, that means that the court took judicial notice that the state had done wrong. It's not an admission of liability. But what began with a bang ended with a whimper.